Dawn broke over Cedar Falls, Oregon, the way it always did. Slow, deliberate, the kind of sunrise that painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows through the streets of the small town nestled in the valley below. Coffee brewed in 100 kitchens. School buses hissed to their first stops. Joggers paced the sidewalks with the rhythm of routine. But something had changed in Cedar Falls over the past 6 months. Something that made people pause mid-conversation, made drivers slow their cars, made shop owners tilt their heads toward Main Street every morning at exactly the same time. It happened at 7:15. Like clockwork, the church bell would chime its first note, and she would appear. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, wearing a bright pink winter coat that seemed too big for her small frame. Her brown hair was always tied in a ponytail that bounced slightly as she walked, never quite perfect, always a little messy. But it was not the girl that made people stop and stare. It was what walked beside her. 6 massive German shepherds moved in perfect formation around the child, their muscular bodies forming a protective barrier that would make a presidential security detail look casual. Each dog weighed at least 80 pounds, their coats dark and healthy, their movements measured and precise. They were not pets. Anyone who had ever worked with police dogs could see that immediately. These were working animals, trained to a level that took years to achieve, and they obeyed a 5-year-old girl as if she were their commanding officer. The girl's small hands gripped 6 leather leashes, the straps stretched out like the spokes of a wheel. The lead dog, a massive male with a distinctive scar above his right eye, walked slightly ahead, his head swiveling left and right in constant surveillance. Another dog, a sleek female, stayed pressed against the girl's left side, close enough that the child could reach down and touch her head. 2 more flanked the rear, their eyes scanning rooftops and second-story windows. The formation was not random. It was tactical. People had tried to approach the girl, friendly neighbors offering smiles and morning greetings. A jogger once veered too close, not paying attention, and before anyone could react, the rear guard dog had smoothly repositioned itself, blocking the jogger's path with quiet, intimidating authority. The jogger had frozen, suddenly aware that 6 pairs of eyes were now fixed on him, and had mumbled an apology before continuing his run. The girl never spoke to strangers. She would offer a polite nod, a tight smile, and a shy lowering of her eyes before continuing her route. Her silence was louder than any words could have been. The town had given her a name, though no one knew if it was correct. They called her the girl with the bong. Some called her the little guardian. Others whispered more dramatic titles, like the child with an army, though those were usually said with nervous laughter, as if saying it too seriously might make it true. And every morning the question grew louder in Cedar Falls. Who was this child? Why did she need 6 police-trained dogs protecting her every step? And most unsettling of all, what were they protecting her from? From the porch of a modest house on Maple Street, Thomas Warren watched the girl pass by for the 173rd morning in a row. He knew it was 173 because he had started counting the day he first saw her, 6 months ago, when his heart had stopped beating for what felt like a full minute. Warren was 65 years old, though his hands still had the strength of a man who had spent 40 years training dogs for military and police work. His hair was steel gray, his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from squinting into the sun on training fields for decades. He had been the owner and chief trainer of Warren Security, one of the most respected K-9 training facilities on the West Coast, until he sold the business 2 years ago after his wife died. Now he lived alone in Cedar Falls, in a house too big for one person, surrounded by photographs and memories and a silence that sometimes felt like it would crush him. But every morning at 7:15, that silence broke. Warren's coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand as he watched the girl and her 6 guardians move down the street with military precision. The lead dog, the one with the scar, stopped at the corner and scanned both directions before allowing the formation to cross. The behavior was so familiar it made Warren's chest ache, because he had taught that behavior to someone else a long time ago. The girl disappeared around the corner, the dogs moving with her like shadows, and Warren set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. His vision blurred slightly, and he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, angry at himself for the emotion that kept surfacing no matter how hard he tried to bury it. Daniel Bennett had been 22 years old when he first walked into Warren Security, fresh out of the police academy, eager and bright-eyed and so goddamn young. Warren had taken one look at the kid and known he was special. Daniel had what Warren called the gift, the ability to communicate with dogs not through dominance or force, but through understanding, through respect. Warren had trained Daniel for 3 years, pushing him harder than any other student because he saw the potential, saw the dedication. Daniel had learned everything Warren could teach, and then he had gone beyond it, developing techniques and approaches that even Warren had not thought of. By the time Daniel graduated from the program, he was one of the finest K-9 officers Warren had ever trained. He was also the closest thing Warren had to a son. Warren's own son, Michael, had left home at 18 after one fight too many about Warren's priorities. Michael had accused his father of loving his dogs more than his family, and Warren, stubborn and proud, had not tried very hard to convince him otherwise. They had not spoken in 15 years. But Daniel had filled some of that empty space. They had stayed in touch after his training ended. Daniel would call with questions, with updates, with stories about his wife Elena and their baby daughter. Warren had been there when Sophie was born, had held the tiny infant in his arms, and felt something crack open in his chest that he had thought was sealed forever. And then 2 years ago, Daniel and Elena Bennett had died in a house fire during what the official report called a tragic accident related to their undercover investigation. Warren had not believed it for a second. He had attended the funeral, standing in the back, watching as the Cedar Falls Police Department honored two of their finest. He had watched as a grandmother, Margaret Bennett, held a 3-year-old Sophie in her arms, the little girl's face buried in her grandmother's shoulder, too young to understand why Mommy and Daddy were never coming home. Warren had approached Margaret after the service, had offered his condolences and his help. Margaret had thanked him politely but distantly, her eyes hollow with grief. Warren had given her his number, told her to call if she ever needed anything, and then he had walked away, back to his empty house, back to his guilt and his silence. He had failed Daniel, failed to teach him enough, failed to keep him safe, failed to be there when it mattered. And now, 6 months ago, Warren had seen a little girl walking down his street with 6 German shepherds moving in a formation he had designed 30 years ago. His hands gripped the porch railing hard enough that his knuckles turned white. Daniel had known he was going to die. Somehow, in some way, Daniel had known, and he had prepared. He had taken everything Warren had taught him, and he had used it to create a last line of defense for his daughter. The dogs were not just protecting Sophie. They were executing a mission that Daniel had programmed into them before his death. Warren could see it in every movement, every formation shift, every scanning pattern. His boy had been brilliant, and Warren had not been there to save him. But the boy's daughter was here now, walking past Warren's house every morning, and Warren had not spoken a word to her in 6 months. The guilt was eating him alive. Across town, in a small apartment above the Cedar Falls Chronicle office, Emma Rodriguez replayed the video for the 7th time that morning. The footage was grainy, shot on a phone by someone standing behind the window of Pete's Corner Cafe. It showed the little girl in the pink coat, surrounded by her 6 dogs, walking with that strange, purposeful pace that had captured the internet's attention. The video had been posted to TikTok 3 weeks ago, and it had gone viral almost overnight. 5 million views, 10,000 comments, shares across every social media platform. The mystery girl with 6 police dogs. Emma leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes fixed on the screen as the video looped again. She was 28 years old, a journalist for a small-town newspaper that barely paid her rent, but she had the instincts of someone who had worked for the New York Times. Those instincts were screaming at her now. This was not just a cute story about a kid who liked dogs. This was something else, something bigger. Emma had grown up in Los Angeles, the daughter of a police officer who had been killed in the line of duty when she was 8 years old. She remembered the funeral, remembered the flag draped over the coffin, remembered the way her mother had collapsed into sobs that seemed like they would never end. Emma had spent the rest of her childhood watching her mother try to hold together a life that had been shattered in one night. It had made Emma into someone who could not walk away from a story about injustice, about loss, about people who needed help and were not getting it. And when she looked at that little girl walking silently through Cedar Falls with 6 dogs guarding her like she was a head of state, Emma's instincts told her that this child needed help. She grabbed her camera bag and her notebook and headed for the door. It was almost 7:15. Pete's Corner Cafe was already crowded when Emma arrived, even though it was barely past 7 in the morning. That was new. 6 months ago, Pete's had been a quiet place where locals grabbed coffee and read the paper. Now it was packed every morning with people who wanted to see the girl. Emma squeezed through the crowd to get a spot near the window. She did not have to wait long. At exactly 7:15, the church bell chimed and murmurs rippled through the cafe. There she is. Look at those dogs. How does she control them? Emma raised her camera, but her finger hesitated on the shutter button. She was not here to exploit a child for clicks and views. She was here to understand what was happening. The girl appeared at the end of the street, a small figure in pink surrounded by 6 massive shadows. The formation was even more impressive in person. Emma had covered police events before, had seen K-9 units in action, and this was textbook tactical movement, the kind of coordination that took months of training to perfect. No, years. Emma lowered her camera and just watched. The girl's face was visible for only a few seconds as she passed the cafe. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her cheeks seemed thinner than a 5-year-old's should be. But what struck Emma most was the expression on the girl's face. She was not scared. She was resigned, as if she had accepted something that no child should have to accept. Emma felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same ache she had felt at 8 years old, standing at her father's funeral. She pushed through the cafe door and stepped onto the sidewalk, moving carefully so as not to startle the dogs. She had covered enough police stories to know that you did not make sudden movements around trained K-9 units. The lead dog noticed her immediately. Its head swiveled toward Emma, and for a moment, those intelligent eyes assessed her with an intensity that made Emma's breath catch. The dog did not growl, did not bare its teeth, but the message was clear. Do not come closer. Emma raised her hands slowly, showing she meant no harm. She opened her mouth to speak, to introduce herself, to say anything that might get the girl to stop and talk. But before she could say a word, the girl tugged gently on the leashes, and all 6 dogs turned with perfect precision, guiding the child down the street and away from Emma. Emma stood on the sidewalk watching them go, her heart pounding harder than it should have been. She had been a journalist for 6 years. She had interviewed gang members, politicians, police chiefs. She had never been intimidated by a source. But those 6 dogs had just made her feel like she was standing in front of a line she did not have permission to cross. She pulled out her phone and started making notes. If she could not talk to the girl directly, she would do what she always did. She would investigate. She would talk to neighbors, to shopkeepers, to anyone who might know something about the mysterious child with the dogs. She would find the truth, because that little girl deserved to have someone looking out for her, someone who was not a dog. As Emma walked back toward her car, she noticed an older man standing on the porch of a house across the street. He was tall, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life spent outdoors. He was watching the girl and her dogs disappear around the corner, and the expression on his face made Emma stop in her tracks. It was not curiosity. It was not confusion. It was grief. Emma made a mental note of the house number and added it to her list. Whoever that man was, he knew something, and Emma was going to find out what. Thomas Warren finished his coffee and went back inside his house, but he could not shake the feeling that had been building in his chest for 6 months. Daniel had trained those dogs for Sophie. That much was obvious. But the more Warren watched, the more he realized that Daniel had done something even more sophisticated than simple protection training. Daniel had encoded a message in the dog's behavior, a pattern, a protocol. Warren walked to his study, a room that still smelled faintly of leather and gun oil, and the cedar wood shelves that lined the walls. He pulled out a notebook, one of dozens he had filled over his 40 years of training dogs, and flipped to a page marked with a faded yellow sticky note. The note was in Daniel's handwriting. Mr. Warren, this is the formation protocol we discussed. Alpha leader position, emotional support flank, rear guard rotation, threat assessment, scanning pattern. I know you said I was overthinking it, but I have a feeling I might need this someday. Thank you for everything you have taught me. The date on the note was 3 years old. Warren's chest constricted. Daniel had been planning this for 3 years, long before Sophie was born, long before he died. What had Daniel known? What had he seen coming? Warren pulled out his laptop, something he still was not entirely comfortable using, and opened a search engine. His fingers, more used to handling leashes than keyboards, typed slowly. Daniel Bennett, Cedar Falls, police officer. The search results filled the screen, and Warren clicked on the first article. Local K-9 officers die in house fire. 2 Cedar Falls police officers, Daniel Bennett and Elena Bennett, died last night in a fire that destroyed their home on Westwood Drive. The couple, both members of the Cedar Falls Police Department's K-9 unit, were reportedly working on an undercover investigation into the Black Viper Ring, a criminal organization suspected of weapons trafficking and drug distribution. Authorities say the fire started in the early hours of the morning and spread rapidly due to what investigators believe was an accelerant. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was fully engulfed. The Bennetts are survived on their daughter Sophie, age 3, who was not home at the time of the fire. Warren read the article 3 times, his hands shaking harder with each pass. Not home at the time of the fire. Where had Sophie been? With her grandmother? With a babysitter? Or had she been in the house and 6 dogs had pulled her out before the flames could reach her? Warren's mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. If Daniel and Elena had been working undercover, if they had been investigating a criminal organization, then their deaths were not an accident. They were murder. And if someone had tried to kill Daniel and Elena, they might also try to kill Sophie. The dogs were not just protecting her from strangers on the street. They were protecting her from people who wanted her dead. Warren stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He grabbed his phone, scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he had not called in 2 years, and hit dial. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Margaret, it's Thomas Warren." There was a long pause. "Mr. Warren, I did not expect to hear from you. I have been watching Sophie walk past my house every morning for 6 months," Warren said, his voice rough. "Those dogs she is walking, they are using a formation protocol I taught Daniel years ago." Another pause. Longer this time. "I know," Margaret said quietly. "Then you know what that means. You know why he trained them that way." "Mr. Warren, I appreciate your concern, but Sophie is fine. The dogs keep her safe. That is all we need. Margaret, if Daniel trained those dogs to protect Sophie like that, it means he knew something was coming. It means she is in danger. We are handling it. By letting a 5-year-old walk around town with 6 dogs? By hoping that whatever killed Daniel and Elena does not come back." Margaret's voice, when she spoke again, was cold. "Daniel did not want you involved, Mr. Warren. He told me that specifically. He said that if anything happened, I should keep Sophie away from anyone connected to his work. That includes you." The words hit Warren like a physical blow. "Margaret, please, let me help." "Goodbye, Mr. Warren." The line went dead. Warren stood in his study, the phone still pressed to his ear, and felt the weight of his failure settle over him like a shroud. Daniel had not wanted his help, had not trusted him enough to bring him into whatever plan he had made for Sophie's safety, because Warren had failed before. He had failed his own son, Michael, and Daniel had known about it. Everyone in Warren's world had known about it. The great K9 trainer who could not keep his own family together. Warren sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. But then a thought occurred to him, cutting through the guilt like a knife. Daniel had used Warren's protocol. Daniel had taken what Warren taught him and built Sophie's protection around it. Daniel had trusted Warren's methods, even if he had not trusted the man himself. That had to mean something. Warren lifted his head and looked at the notebook on his desk, at Daniel's handwriting on that faded yellow note. If Margaret would not let him help directly, then he would help indirectly. He would watch, he would observe. He would make sure those dogs were doing their job correctly. And if something went wrong, if those dogs failed, Warren would be there. He owed Daniel that much. Chapter 4, Convergence. Emma spent the rest of the day talking to anyone in Cedar Falls who would speak to her about the girl with the dogs. The owner of Pete's Corner Cafe, a man named Pete Harrison, who had run the place for 30 years, leaned against the counter and shook his head when Emma asked him about the girl. "Sweet little thing," Pete said. "Never says much, just nods politely and keeps walking. Those dogs, though, they watch everything. Gives me the chills sometimes, how focused they are." "Do you know her name?" Emma asked. "Sophie, I think. Or at least that is what I heard someone call her once. Her grandmother lives over on Birch Street." Emma made a note. "What about the dogs? Do you know where they came from?" Pete's expression darkened. "I heard they belonged to her parents. Both of them were police officers, 9 unit. They died a couple years back." "Died how?" "House fire. Real tragedy. Left the little girl with just her grandmother." Emma felt that familiar ache in her chest again. "And the dogs stayed with her?" "Guess so, though I do not know how a grandmother and a 5-year-old managed to take care of 6 police dogs. Those are not normal pets." Emma thanked Pete and moved on to the next interview. By the time the sun started to set, she had spoken to a dozen people, and all of them told her the same basic story. The girl was Sophie Bennett. Her parents had been Daniel and Elena Bennett, K9 officers who died in a fire 2 years ago while investigating something related to organized crime. But no one could tell Emma why Sophie needed 6 dogs guarding her. No one could explain the tactical formations, the constant surveillance, the way the dogs treated every stranger as a potential threat. As Emma walked back to her car, she passed the house where she had seen the gray-haired man that morning. The lights were on inside, and through the window, she could see him sitting at a desk, staring at something on a computer screen. Emma hesitated, then walked up the driveway and knocked on the door. The man opened it a moment later, and up close, Emma could see the lines of worry etched into his face. "Can I help you?" he asked. "My name is Emma Rodriguez. I am a reporter for the Cedar Falls Chronicle. I am writing a story about Sophie Bennett." The man's expression hardened. "I have nothing to say to reporters." "I am not trying to exploit her," Emma said quickly. "I just want to understand what is happening. Why does a 5-year-old need 6 police dogs protecting her?" The man studied Emma for a long moment, his eyes sharp despite his age. "You really want to know?" he asked. "Yes." "Then you better come inside. But if you print anything I tell you without my permission, I will make sure you never work as a journalist again." Emma nodded and followed him into the house. The man closed the door behind her and gestured to a chair in the living room. Emma sat, her notebook ready, but the man did not sit down. He paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back, as if he were giving a lecture. "My name is Thomas Warren," he said. "I was a canine trainer for 40 years. Trained dogs for police departments, military units, private security. Daniel Bennett was one of my students. One of the best I ever trained." Emma's pen flew across the page. "You trained Sophie's father?" "I did, and I watched that boy become one of the finest canine officers I have ever seen. He had a gift. An understanding of how dogs think, how they communicate. He was special." Warren stopped pacing and looked directly at Emma. "Daniel and Elena did not die in an accident. They were murdered." Emma's hand froze mid-word. "The report said it was a fire." "The report was wrong or incomplete, or covering something up. I do not know which, but I know Daniel. He was working an undercover case into a criminal organization called the Black Viper Ring. And I know that 3 months before he died, he gave me a note about a tactical formation protocol he wanted to perfect. A formation designed to protect a single high-value target." Emma felt her pulse quicken. Sophie. Daniel knew he was in danger. He knew that if he died, someone might come after his daughter. So he trained those 6 dogs to do what he could not do anymore. Protect her. "But why would anyone come after Sophie? She is a child." Warren's expression was grim. "I have been asking myself that same question for 6 months. The only answer I can come up with is that Daniel and Elena found something. Evidence. Proof of something that could destroy the Black Viper Ring. And they hid it somewhere before they died." "And you think Sophie knows where it is?" "No, I think Sophie is the key to finding it, even if she does not know it herself. And I think the people who killed her parents know that too." Emma stared at Warren, her mind racing through the implications. "Mr. Warren, if what you are saying is true, then Sophie is in serious danger." "I know." "Then why have not you done something? Why have not you gone to the police?" Warren's face crumpled, and for a moment Emma saw the full weight of his guilt. "Because Daniel did not trust me to help him when he was alive. His mother-in-law, Margaret, told me today that Daniel specifically said to keep me away from Sophie. So I have been watching from a distance, trying to figure out what to do, how to help without making things worse." Emma stood up, her reporter's instinct giving way to something deeper, something human. "Mr. Warren, I lost my father when I was 8. He was a police officer too, killed in the line of duty. And for years I wished someone had done more to protect him. To protect us." She met Warren's eyes. "I do not know what Daniel wanted or did not want, but I know that little girl is walking around with 6 dogs because her father could not be there to protect her himself. And if you trained Daniel, if you were like a father to him, then you owe it to him to make sure his daughter is safe, even if he did not ask you to." Warren was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You are right. So what do we do?" Warren walked to his desk and picked up the notebook with Daniel's note in it. "We start by figuring out what Daniel was trying to tell us. Those dogs are not just protecting Sophie. They are executing a mission, a plan. And if we can figure out what that plan is, we might be able to help her before it is too late." Emma felt a surge of determination. "Then let us get started." The next morning, Emma arrived at Warren's house at 6:30, an hour before Sophie's walk. Warren had already brewed coffee and they sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks and old training manuals and photographs of Daniel Bennett. Daniel was methodical, Warren said, pointing to a photograph of a young Daniel in police uniform, standing next to a German shepherd. Everything he did had a purpose. If he trained those dogs to walk Sophie in a specific pattern every morning, it is because that pattern means something. Emma pulled out her own notebook, where she had sketched a rough map of Cedar Falls based on witness descriptions of Sophie's route. She walks the same path every day, Emma said. Starts at her house on Birch Street, goes down Main, stops at the park, past Pete's Cafe, around the library, through the church parking lot and back home. Warren studied the map, his eyes narrowing. 6 stops, he said quietly. She stops at 6 specific locations. Emma looked up. How do you know? Because there are 6 dogs. Daniel was that precise. 1 dog for every checkpoint. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. You think he hid something at those locations? I think he hid pieces of something. Evidence, proof, whatever he and Elena found that got them killed. But how would Sophie know where to find it? She would not. The dogs would. Warren tapped the photograph. Daniel would have trained each dog to pause at a specific location, to signal, and over time, Sophie would learn the routine without even realizing what it meant. Emma stared at the map, her mind racing. So every morning, Sophie is walking past 6 hiding spots, and she has no idea. Exactly. And neither does whoever is looking for that evidence. Warren's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. What is it? Emma asked. Warren turned the phone toward her. On the screen was a text message from an unknown number. Stop asking questions or the girl dies. Emma's blood ran cold. Who sent this? I do not know, but someone knows we are looking into this. We need to call the police. And tell them what? That I got a threatening text? They will dismiss it. Unless we have proof that Sophie is in danger, they will not do anything. Emma stood up, her hands shaking slightly. Then we get proof. We follow her route today. We see if anyone is watching her. Warren hesitated, then nodded. All right, but we stay far back. If those dogs sense we are following with bad intent, they will react. At 7:15, Sophie appeared on her street as she always did, surrounded by her 6 guardians. But this time Emma and Warren were watching from Warren's car, parked half a block away. They followed at a distance as Sophie made her way through Cedar Falls, the dogs moving with their usual precision. Emma kept her camera ready, documenting everything, while Warren watched the formation with a trainer's eye. There, Warren said, suddenly pointing. The lead dog just shifted position. See how he moves Sophie slightly to the left? He is steering her away from something. Emma followed Warren's gaze and saw what he meant. A man in a dark jacket had been walking towards Sophie on the sidewalk, but the lead dog had smoothly guided the girl to the other side of the street, putting distance between her and the stranger. Is that normal? Emma asked. For a protection dog, yes, but look at the rear guard. Emma looked and saw the 2 dogs at the back of the formation. They were both staring at something behind them, their bodies tense. Emma turned and looked in the same direction. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked at the far end of the street. It had not been there a moment ago. Warren, Emma said, her voice tight. Are you seeing that? I am. The SUV did not move. It just sat there, engine running, watching. Sophie and her dogs turned the corner and disappeared from view. The SUV waited another 30 seconds, then slowly pulled away from the curb and followed. Emma's hands tightened on the camera. Someone is tracking her. Warren's jaw clenched, and those dogs know it. They followed the SUV, staying far enough back to avoid detection. The vehicle tailed Sophie for another 3 blocks before finally turning down a side street and disappearing. Emma and Warren returned to Warren's house, both of them shaken by what they had seen. We were right, Emma said. Someone is watching her. Warren nodded grimly. And whoever sent me that text message knows we are watching too. Emma pulled out her laptop. I'm going to see if I can find out anything about that SUV, license plate, registration, anything. While Emma worked, Warren stared at the map of Sophie's route, his mind churning through possibilities. 6 stops, 6 hiding spots, 6 pieces of evidence. Daniel had been brilliant, but he had also been desperate, and desperation made people take risks. What if the evidence was not hidden at those locations anymore? What if someone had already found it? Warren's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on his front door. He and Emma exchanged a glance. Then Warren walked to the door and opened it. Standing on his porch was a woman in her 60s, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. Warren recognized her immediately. Margaret Bennett, Sophie's grandmother. Mr. Warren, Margaret said, her voice strained. We need to talk. Warren stepped aside and Margaret entered the house. She saw Emma and hesitated. This is Emma Rodriguez, Warren said. She is a reporter, but she is trying to help. Margaret looked at Emma for a long moment, then nodded. Then you both need to know the truth. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, its edges worn and yellowed. Daniel left this for me before he died. He told me to open it only if something happened to him and Elena. I opened it the day after the funeral. Margaret's hands trembled as she held out the envelope. Inside is a letter and instructions. Daniel knew he was going to die, Mr. Warren. He knew, and he prepared for it. Warren took the envelope, his throat tight. What do the instructions say? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. They say that if anyone ever comes looking for Sophie, if anyone ever threatens her, I should find you. Because you are the only person Daniel trusted to finish what he started. Warren opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a single sheet of paper covered in Daniel's handwriting. Mr. Warren, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry I did not come to you for help while I was alive. I was afraid of putting you in danger. But now I need you to do something for me. I need you to protect Sophie. The dogs will guard her body, but they cannot solve the puzzle I left behind. Only you can do that. The evidence that will destroy the Black Viper ring is hidden along Sophie's walking route. 6 locations, 6 pieces. The dogs know where. Trust them. Trust yourself. And please tell Sophie I love her. Warren read the letter 3 times, his eyes burning until he had to look away. Daniel had trusted him after all. Emma leaned over his shoulder and read the letter, then looked at Margaret. Does Sophie know about this? Margaret shook her head. She was 3 when her parents died. She barely remembers them. All she knows is that the dogs keep her safe. Warren folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and determined. Then we do what Daniel asked. We solve the puzzle. We find the evidence, and we make sure whoever killed Daniel and Elena pays for it. Margaret nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Warren. Warren extended his hand and Margaret took it. Call me Thomas, he said, and we are going to keep Sophie safe. I promise you that. As Margaret left, Emma turned to Warren with fire in her eyes. So what is the plan? Warren looked at the map on the table at the 6 locations marked in red. Tomorrow morning, we follow Sophie's road. We document every stop, and we find out what Daniel left behind. Emma nodded. And if that black SUV shows up again? Warren's expression hardened. Then we find out who is driving it, and we make sure they understand that Sophie Bennett is not alone anymore. Outside, the sun set over Cedar Falls, casting long shadows through the streets. Somewhere in those shadows, a black SUV idled at the curb, its driver watching and waiting. And in a modest house on Birch Street, a 5-year-old girl sat at the dinner table with her grandmother, 6 dogs lying in a protective circle around them, waiting for morning to come. The game was about to change. The next morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of Oregon dawn where mist clung to the ground and made the world feel smaller, more dangerous. Thomas Warren had not slept. He sat at his kitchen table, Daniel's letter spread out before him, reading the words over and over until they were burned into his memory. The dogs know where. Trust them. Emma Rodriguez arrived at 6:30 with coffee and a determined expression that reminded Warren of the young officers he used to train, the ones who had something to prove. She spread her notes across the table next to Warren's training manuals, and together they studied the map of Sophie's route like generals planning a campaign. 6 locations, Emma said, tapping each mark with her pen. The park bench on Maple, the old oak tree near Pete's Cafe, the corner outside the library, the fountain in Town Square, the church steps, and the mailbox at the end of Birch Street. Warren nodded slowly. Each one corresponds to a dog in the formation. Daniel would have trained them to pause at specific spots, to give Sophie time to rest, to create a pattern that looked natural. But how do we know which hiding spot corresponds to which dog? We watch, we observe. The lead dog will signal first. That is basic tactical protocol. The alpha always secures the primary objective before the team moves to secondary targets. Emma glanced at the clock, 6:45. We have 30 minutes. They gathered their equipment. Warren brought binoculars and a voice recorder. Emma packed her camera with a telephoto lens. They were not just following Sophie today. They were documenting her guardians at work. At 7:15, the church bell chimed, and Sophie emerged from her grandmother's house wearing her pink coat and that familiar ponytail. The 6 dogs fell into formation with the precision of a military honor guard. Warren watched through his binoculars from inside his car, parked 3 houses down. There, he whispered. The lead dog. That is Thor. I recognize him from the scar above his eye. Emma zoomed her camera in on the massive German shepherd. He looks like he could take down a bear. He probably could. Daniel trained him for high-threat environments. That dog is worth more than most people's cars. Sophie began her walk and Warren started the car, following at a careful distance. The formation moved with its usual grace, Thor leading, the female dog, Luna, pressed close to Sophie's side, the others scanning and protecting. The first stop came at the park. Thor slowed, then paused at a specific bench. It was an old wooden bench, weathered and worn, with a small plaque dedicating it to someone who had died 30 years ago. Sophie stopped as she always did, and Thor sat beside the bench, his eyes scanning the area. "That is the signal," Warren said. "He just told Sophie to stop here." Emma was already out of the car, moving through the park with her camera hidden in her coat. She circled around to get a better angle, and through the telephoto lens, she saw something that made her breath catch. There were scratches on the underside of the bench, deliberate marks like someone had carved into the wood. And beneath those marks, barely visible, was the edge of something metallic. Emma did not dare get closer. The dogs were too alert, too focused, but she photographed everything she could and hurried back to the car. "There is something under that bench," she told Warren. "Metal, could be a container." Warren's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Daniel was that clever. He hid evidence in plain sight, in public locations where no one would think to look. They followed Sophie to the next stop, the old oak tree near Pete's Cafe. This time it was Luna who paused, pressing her nose against a hollow in the trunk. Sophie reached out absently and touched the tree, her small hand running over the bark as if she had done it 1,000 times before, which Warren realized she probably had. "She does not know what she is doing," he said quietly. "To her, this is just part of the routine. But the dogs are reinforcing it, making sure she touches each location." "Why would they do that?" Emma asked. "Scent marking. If Sophie touches the hiding spots regularly, her scent stays fresh on them. Anyone else who gets too close, the dogs will know immediately." They documented 3 more stops. The corner outside the library, where Ace paused and sniffed at a loose brick in the wall. The fountain in Town Square, where Shadow stood perfectly still, staring at the drain grate. The church steps, where Storm positioned himself on a specific stone that looked no different from the others around it. Each time, Sophie stopped. Each time, she performed some small action that seemed innocent. Touching a wall, adjusting her shoelace, looking up at the sky. But each action put her in direct contact with a hiding spot that contained a piece of her father's final mission. By the time Sophie completed her route and returned home, Warren and Emma had photographed all 6 locations. They drove back to Warren's house in silence, both of them processing what they had discovered. Inside, Emma spread the photographs across the table like evidence at a crime scene. "This is incredible," she said. "Daniel created a walking treasure map using his own daughter as the guide." Warren stared at the images, his chest tight with emotion. He trusted those dogs to keep her safe while she did it. Every single day for 2 years, they have been protecting her and protecting the evidence at the same time. "So what do we do now? Do we try to retrieve the evidence?" Warren hesitated. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. If they moved too quickly, if they exposed what they had found, whoever was watching Sophie would know. The black SUV, the threatening text message. Someone was waiting for them to make a mistake. "We need to be smart about this," Warren said. "We retrieve one piece, just one. We see what we are dealing with. Then we decide the next move." Emma nodded. "Which location?" "The park bench. It is the most public, the most exposed. If anyone is watching, they will expect us to avoid it. So we go there first." They waited until nightfall. Warren had learned long ago that darkness was both a weapon and a shield, and tonight they needed both. He and Emma drove to the park just after 9, when Cedar Falls had settled into its small-town quiet and the streets were empty. The park was darker than Warren expected. The street lights cast long shadows across the grass, and the bench sat beneath an old maple tree that blocked most of the ambient light. Perfect for hiding something. Terrible for retrieving it. Emma kept watch while Warren approached the bench with a small flashlight and a set of tools he had not used in years. His hands were steady despite his age, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knelt beside the bench and ran his fingers along the underside until he felt the scratches Emma had photographed. There. A small metal box, no bigger than a deck of cards, secured to the wood with heavy-duty magnets. Warren pulled it free and opened it carefully. Inside was a USB drive, wrapped in waterproof plastic and a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the paper and felt his heart stop. It was a note in Daniel's handwriting. If you found this, you are smarter than I gave you credit for. This drive contains recordings of Vincent Kane ordering the execution of 3 federal witnesses. It is enough to put him away for life, but only if all 6 drives are combined. Alone, each piece is just noise. Together, they are a symphony of evidence. Trust the dogs. They know the rest. Warren read the note twice, then carefully placed it in the USB drive in his jacket pocket. He was about to stand when Emma's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and urgent. "Warren, we have company." He looked up and saw headlights turning into the park entrance. A black SUV, moving slowly, deliberately, as if searching for something or someone. "Get down," Warren hissed. He and Emma crouched behind the bench, hidden in the shadow of the maple tree, as the SUV cruised through the park. It stopped 30 feet away, and Warren could hear the engine idling, could feel the weight of whoever was inside scanning the area. The SUV sat there for what felt like an eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it pulled away and disappeared into the night. Warren and Emma stayed frozen for another full minute before either of them dared to breathe. "They are watching the locations," Emma whispered. "They know about the hiding spots." "Not all of them," Warren said. "If they knew, they would have already taken the evidence. They are guessing, searching, just like we are." "Then we need to move fast. If they figure it out before we do," Warren nodded grimly, "we collect the rest tomorrow. Before that SUV comes back." They drove back to Warren's house, and Warren immediately called Margaret. She answered on the second ring, her voice heavy with worry. "Thomas?" "Margaret, I need you to keep Sophie home tomorrow. Do not let her do her morning walk." There was a pause. "Why, what happened?" "Someone is watching the route, watching the locations where Daniel hid the evidence. If Sophie goes out there tomorrow, she could walk right into whoever is looking for her." Margaret's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "Yes, please, keep her home, just for one day." "All right, I will tell her she is not feeling well. The dogs will not like it, but they will stay with her." Warren thanked her and ended the call. He turned to find Emma staring at the USB drive he had placed on the table. "Do you have a computer we can use to see what is on this?" she asked. Warren nodded and retrieved his laptop. He plugged in the drive, and after a moment, a video file appeared on the screen. Warren clicked and play. The footage was grainy, shot from a hidden camera, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed a man in his late 40s, well-dressed, sitting in what looked like an expensive office. His face was cold, his voice colder. "I want them dead," the man said. "The Bennetts, both of them, and make it look like an accident." Another voice off-camera replied, "What about the kid?" "The kid does not matter. She is 3 years old. She does not know anything." Warren felt his blood run cold. This was Vincent Kane, the head of the Black Viper Ring, the man who had ordered Daniel and Elena's deaths. The video ended, and Warren sat back, his hands shaking. "Daniel recorded this," he said quietly. "He knew Kane wanted him dead, and he recorded the proof." Emma stared at the screen. "If this is just one of 6 pieces, what do the others contain?" "Enough to destroy Kane's entire organization. Enough to make sure he never sees the outside of a prison cell again." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had discovered settling over them like a heavy blanket. Then Warren's phone rang. He did not recognize the number, but he answered anyway. "Hello?" A woman's voice, smooth and calm. "Mr. Warren, my name is Victoria Hayes. I am a neighbor of the Bennetts. I believe we need to talk." Warren's instincts screamed at him. "About what?" "About Sophie, about the days, about the fact that you and a young reporter have been following that little girl around town for the past 2 days." Warren's jaw clenched. "How do you know that?" "Because I have been watching you, just as you have been watching her. The difference is I know what you are looking for, and I know that if you do not stop, people are going to get hurt." "Is that a threat?" Victoria laughed softly. "No, Mr. Warren. It is a warning. Stop digging. Stop asking questions. Leave Sophie alone, or the consequences will be severe." The line went dead. Warren set the phone down slowly and looked at Emma. "We have a problem." Chapter 8, The Breaking Point. Warren and Emma decided they could not wait. If Victoria Hayes knew they were investigating, if she was connected to Kane, then every moment they delayed was a moment closer to disaster. They spent the rest of the night planning. Warren called in a favor from an old friend, a retired police officer named Jack Morrison, who owed him more than one debt. Morrison agreed to help them retrieve the remaining USB drives at first light before anyone else could get to them. But at 2 in the morning, everything changed. Warren's phone rang again. This time it was Margaret, and her voice was pure panic. Thomas, someone is trying to break into my house. The dogs are going crazy. I called 911, but I do not know how long. The line cut off. Warren was out the door before Emma could even grab her coat. He drove like a man possessed, his old truck screaming through the empty streets of Cedar Falls. Emma holding on to the passenger seat as Warren took corners at speeds that should have been impossible. They reached Margaret's house in 4 minutes. Police sirens were already wailing in the distance, but Warren did not wait. He grabbed a tire iron from the back of his truck and ran toward the house. The front window was shattered. Glass littered the porch. Inside, Warren could hear shouting, barking, the sounds of a struggle. He kicked the door open and charged inside. The living room was chaos. 3 masked men were grappling with the poons, trying to fight their way toward the hallway where Margaret's bedroom was. Thor had one man pinned against the wall, teeth bared, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Luna and Ace were blocking the hallway, forming a living barrier that no one could pass. Storm and Shadow circled another intruder, snapping and lunging, driving him back toward the broken window. And Titan, the biggest of them all, stood in front of Sophie's bedroom door, his body tense, ready to die before letting anyone through. Warren did not hesitate. He swung the tire iron and caught one of the masked men across the shoulder. The man screamed and went down. The Tonch, recognizing Warren's scent, his presence, adjusted their formation to work with him. It was brutal. It was fast. And when the police finally arrived 2 minutes later, all 3 intruders were on the ground, bleeding and groaning, surrounded by 6 German shepherds who looked ready to tear them apart if they so much as twitched. Warren stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, his shirt torn, a cut bleeding above his left eyebrow. Emma rushed to him, her hands shaking as she checked his injuries. "Are you okay?" "I am fine. Where is Margaret? Where is Sophie?" A bedroom door opened, and Margaret emerged, clutching Sophie in her arms. The little girl's face was buried in her grandmother's shoulder, her small body trembling. Behind them, Titan followed, his eyes still locked on the intruders. "They are safe," Margaret said, her voice breaking. The dogs saved us." Warren walked over to Sophie and knelt down, his heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. "Hey, Angel," he said softly. "You are okay now. You are safe." Sophie looked at him, and for the first time since he had been watching her all these months, she spoke directly to him. "Are you Grandpa Warren?" Warren felt his throat close up. "Yes, sweetheart, I am. Daddy said you would come. He said you would keep me safe when the bad people came." Warren reached out and gently touched her hair. "Your daddy was right. I am here now, and I am not going anywhere." The police took the 3 intruders into custody. Chief Morrison himself arrived on scene, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. He pulled Warren aside while paramedics checked Sophie and Margaret. "Warren, what the hell is going on here?" Warren handed him the USB drive. "This is what is going on. Daniel Bennett left evidence that can take down Vincent Kane and the entire Black Viper ring. Those men were here to find it, or to kill Sophie so no one else could." Morrison stared at the drive. "You are telling me Daniel Bennett was building a case against Kane when he died? I am telling you Daniel knew he was going to die, and he made sure his daughter would be the one to finish what he started. Now we need to protect her before Kane sends more people." Morrison nodded slowly. "I will put a unit on the house. 24-hour protection." "That is not enough. Kane has people everywhere. Police, government, you name it. We need to end this now." "How?" Warren looked at Emma, who had been standing quietly nearby, recording everything. "We collect the rest of the evidence. We go public. We make sure the entire world knows what Kane did, and we do it before he can stop us." Morrison hesitated, then made his decision. "All right, but we do this by the book. No more lone wolf operations. We work together." Warren extended his hand, and Morrison shook it. As the police finished securing the scene, Warren sat on the porch with the 6 dogs gathered around him. Thor rested his massive head on Warren's knee, and Warren scratched behind the dog's ears. "You did good, boy," Warren whispered. "Daniel would be proud of you." Thor's tail thumped once against the porch, and Warren felt tears sting his eyes. Inside the house, Sophie sat with her grandmother, wrapped in a blanket, while Emma kept her company. The little girl looked up at Emma with those 2 old eyes. "Are the bad people going to come back?" Sophie asked. Emma glanced at Margaret, then back at Sophie. "Not if we stop them first." "How do we do that?" "We find the treasures your daddy left. We use them to put the bad people in jail forever." Sophie nodded slowly. "The dogs know where the treasures are." "Yes, they do." Sophie looked out the window to where Warren sat with the mugs. Grandpa Warren knows too, does he not? Emma smiled. Yes, sweetie, he does. Good, Sophie said quietly, because I am tired of being scared. Emma put her arm around the little girl and held her close. So are we, Sophie. So are we. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Cedar Falls. The streets were still dark, the air still cold, but somewhere in that darkness, Warren could feel the tide beginning to turn. They had the first piece of evidence. They had the truth about what Daniel had done, what he had sacrificed. And they had 6 dogs who would die before letting anyone hurt Sophie Bennett. The war was not over. But for the first time in 2 years, Warren felt like they might actually win. He looked at Thor and whispered a promise into the cold morning air. I will finish what your master started, I swear it. And deep in his chest, in a place that had been empty and broken for so long, Warren felt something stir back to life. Hope. The sun rose over Cedar Falls on a morning that felt different from all the others that had come before. Warren stood in Chief Morrison's office at the police station, surrounded by maps and photographs and evidence that had been hidden for 2 years. Emma sat at the conference table, her laptop open, typing furiously as she prepared the story that would blow the lid off everything. And in a safe room down the hall, Sophie and Margaret waited under armed guard, 6 German shepherds forming an impenetrable wall around them. Morrison spread the remaining location markers across the map. 5 more hiding spots. 5 more pieces of the puzzle that would destroy Vincent Kane. We have to move now, Morrison said. Those men we arrested last night will lawyer up within hours. Once Kane knows they failed, he will send more. Better trained, better armed. Warren nodded. His left arm was bandaged where one of the intruders had caught him with a knife during the fight. The cut was not deep, but it served as a reminder that they were running out of time. We collect all 5 remaining drives this morning, before Kane can regroup. I will assign officers to each location, Morrison said. We secure them simultaneously so Kane's people cannot warn each other. Emma looked up from her laptop. And I go public with the story the moment we have all 6 drives. Once it hits the internet, Kane cannot bury it. The whole world will know what he did. Warren glanced at the clock, 7 in the morning. In 15 minutes, Sophie would normally be starting her walk. But today, the walk would be different. Today, it would be the police who followed the route the dogs had memorized. We need the dogs, Warren said quietly. Morrison frowned. What do you mean? Daniel trained each dog to recognize its corresponding location. They know exactly where to stop, exactly where to signal. If we go in blind, we might miss something. We might trigger a trap or an alarm. But if the dogs guide us, we do it right. Morrison considered this, then nodded. All right, but Sophie stays here. I am not putting that child in danger again. Agreed, but I need Thor, the lead dog. He knows the primary location and he will work with me. Morrison made the call, and 10 minutes later, Thor was brought into the office. The massive German shepherd scanned the room, assessed every person present, and then walked directly to Warren and sat at his feet. Warren reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. Good boy, we have work to do. They assembled the teams quickly. Morrison assigned his most trusted officers to each location. Emma would accompany the team going to the library. A forensics expert would handle the church. And Warren, with Thor at his side, would return to the oak tree near Pete's Cafe. As they prepared to leave, Warren stopped by the safe room to see Sophie. The little girl was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the other 5 dogs, drawing pictures with crayons that one of the officers had found for her. She looked up when Warren entered, and her face brightened. Grandpa Warren, she said. It was still strange to hear her call him that, but it filled something hollow in Warren's chest every time. He knelt down beside her. Hey, Angel, I need to borrow Thor for a little while. Is that okay? Sophie nodded seriously. He will keep you safe. He is the bravest. Just like your daddy. Sophie's eyes grew sad. I wish I could remember him better. Warren felt his throat tighten. Your daddy loved you more than anything in the world. Everything he did to keep you safe, and today we are going to finish what he started. Will the bad people go away after today? Yes, sweetheart, they will. Sophie hugged him then, her small arms wrapping around his neck, and Warren had to blink hard to keep the tears from falling. When she pulled back, she looked at him with those 2 wise eyes. Thank you for coming back, Grandpa. Daddy said you would. Warren could not speak. He just nodded and stood, Thor rising with him. As they left the room, Margaret touched his arm. Bring him back safe, she said, gesturing to Thor. Those dogs are all she has left of Daniel. I promise. The teams deployed at 7:30. Warren and Thor drove to the oak tree location in Warren's truck. a police cruiser following at a discreet distance. The morning was cold and clear, and Cedar Falls looked peaceful, unaware of the war being waged in its shadows. Warren parked near Pete's Cafe and walked Thor to the oak tree. The dog immediately went to work, his nose pressed against the hollow in the trunk that Luna usually marked during Sophie's walks. Thor sat and looked up at Warren, his tail wagging once. The signal. Warren pulled on gloves and reached into the hollow. His fingers found the same kind of metal box they had discovered under the park bench. He pulled it free, opened it, and found another USB drive and another note. This drive contains financial records showing Kane's money laundering operations through 6 shell companies. Combined with the others, it proves the entire network. You are doing good work. Keep going. Warren pocketed the drive and was about to stand when Thor's demeanor changed. The dog's ears went flat, his body tensed, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Someone was watching them. Warren turned slowly and saw a woman standing 30 feet away. She was in her late 30s, attractive, well-dressed. She smiled at him, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Warren," she said, "I told you to stop digging." Victoria Hayes. Warren stood, positioning himself between Victoria and Thor. "You made a mistake threatening me." "Did I? Because it looks like you are the one making mistakes." "Collecting evidence that does not belong to you. Interfering in things you do not understand." "I understand perfectly. You work for Kane. You have been watching Sophie, reporting back to him, waiting for an opportunity to find what Daniel hid." Victoria's smile widened. Daniel was a fool. He thought he could take down the Black Viper ring with recordings and spreadsheets. He did not understand that men like Kane do not go down easy. Where is Kane now? Somewhere you will never find him. Somewhere the police will never reach him. And when this is over, when all of you are dead, he will still be out there, still be powerful, still be untouchable. Thor growled louder, and Warren put a hand on the dog's head. "You are wrong. Kane is finished. We have the evidence. We have witnesses. And we have the one thing he can never kill. The truth." Victoria's expression hardened. "Then I guess we have a problem." She reached into her coat, and Warren knew she was going for a weapon. But before she could draw it, Thor lunged. The dog moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in less than 2 seconds. Victoria screamed and tried to run, but Thor caught her coat and dragged her to the ground. She hit the pavement hard, the gun skittering from her hand, and Thor stood over her, teeth bared, daring her to move. Warren walked over and picked up the gun. Police officers rushed from the cruiser, and within moments, Victoria was in handcuffs, screaming threats and curses as they loaded her into the back of the car. Morrison arrived minutes later, his face grim. "We got the other 4 drives. All teams reported successful retrieval. No casualties." Warren let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "Then we have everything." "Almost." Morrison held up his phone. "We just got a tip from one of the men we arrested last night. He is willing to talk in exchange for a deal. And he says Vincent Kane is not hiding overseas. He is right here in Cedar Falls, at an abandoned factory on the east side." Warren stared at Morrison. "How long has he been here?" "According to our informant, Kane never left. He has been running his operation from that factory for months, waiting for someone to find Daniel's evidence so he could eliminate them. Then let us give him what he is waiting for." The factory had been abandoned for 15 years. It sat on the edge of Cedar Falls like a monument to a dead industrial age. Its windows broken, its walls covered in graffiti, its interior a maze of rusted machinery and collapsed catwalks. It was the perfect place to hide, the perfect place to run a criminal empire without anyone noticing. And now it was about to become Vincent Kane's prison. Morrison assembled a SWAT team, 20 officers armed and armored, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of training. Warren was not officially part of the team, but Morrison had stopped trying to keep him out. The old man had earned his place in this fight. Thor stood beside Warren as they geared up in the staging area half a mile from the factory. The dog was calm, focused, his eyes locked on the building in the distance, as if he could sense what was waiting inside. Emma approached, her camera ready. Morrison said, "I can document the raid, but I have to stay back with the secondary team." Warren nodded. "Good. You need to survive this to tell the story." "So do you." Warren met her eyes. "I have been surviving for 65 years. Today I am going to live." The teams moved out at noon. The sun was high and bright, casting harsh shadows across the factory grounds. Morrison led the first breach team, moving through the main entrance with controlled aggression. Warren followed with the second team, Thor at his side, moving through a side door that led into the factory's administrative section. The interior was dark despite the daylight outside. The windows were covered with tarps and boards, creating a labyrinth of shadows and dust. Warren moved carefully, his hand on Thor's collar, letting the dog's instincts guide him. They found the first group of Kane's men in what used to be the factory's break room. 4 men armed with automatic weapons, standing guard over a stairwell that led down to the basement levels. They saw the police and opened fire without hesitation. The gunfight was brief and brutal. SWAT officers returned fire with disciplined volleys. 2 of Kane's men went down immediately. The other 2 tried to retreat down the stairs, and that was when Thor made his move. The dog broke free from Warren's grip and charged. He hit the first man like a missile, jaws clamping onto the man's arm, dragging him away from his weapon. The second man turned to fire at Thor, and Warren did not think. He just acted. He tackled the man from behind, driving him into the wall with all the force his aging body could muster. They hit the concrete hard, and Warren felt something in his shoulder pop, but he did not let go. He held on until SWAT officers pulled the man away and cuffed him. Morrison helped Warren to his feet. "You all right?" Warren rotated his shoulder and winced. "I will be. Let us keep moving." They descended into the basement, and the air grew colder, damper. The basement had been converted into a makeshift command center. Computer servers hummed in the darkness. File cabinets lined the walls. And in the center of it all, sitting at a desk like a CEO in his office, was Vincent Kane. He was older than he looked in Daniel's recordings. His hair was gray at the temples, his face lined with age and stress. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, and completely devoid of fear. "Ah," Kane said calmly, "the cavalry has arrived." Morrison stepped forward, his weapon trained on Kane. "Vincent Kane, you are under arrest for murder, racketeering, and conspiracy." Kane smiled. "On what evidence? Some recordings that could easily be faked? Financial records that mean nothing without context? You have nothing." Warren pushed past Morrison and threw the 6 USB drives onto the desk. "We have everything. Every recording, every transaction, every order you gave. Daniel Bennett spent 2 years collecting proof of what you are, and his daughter kept it as safe until we could finish what he started." Kane's smile faltered. He looked at the drifters, then at Warren. Daniel Bennett was a fool, and his daughter is a loose end that should have been tied up 2 years ago. Warren felt rage boil in his chest. "You tried to kill a 3-year-old child. I tried to eliminate a threat. There is a difference." Morrison stepped forward and grabbed Kane by the arm, hauling him to his feet. "You are done, Kane. It is over." Kane laughed as they cuffed him. "It is never over. I have lawyers. I have judges in my pocket. I have connections you cannot even imagine. I will be out in a month." "Not this time," Emma said from the doorway. She held up her phone, recording everything. "This time, the whole world is watching." Kane's face went pale as he realized what Emma had done. The raid was being live-streamed. Thousands of people were watching as he was arrested. There would be no cover-up, no backroom deals. The evidence was public now. Morrison hauled Kane toward the stairs, and the other officers began securing the basement, collecting computers and files and weapons. Warren stood in the center of the command center, Thor at his side, and felt something break loose inside him. They had done it. They had finished what Daniel started. Thor looked up at Warren and wagged his tail once, as if to say, "Mission accomplished." The trial of Vincent Kane became the biggest story in Oregon history. The evidence was overwhelming. 6 USB drives containing recordings, financial documents, witness testimonies, and orders for murder. The prosecution built a case so airtight that even Kane's expensive lawyers could not find a crack in it. Warren sat in the courtroom every day, watching as the evidence he and Emma had collected was presented piece by piece. Sophie sat with her grandmother in the back row, the 6 dogs not allowed inside but waiting just outside the courthouse doors, a constant reminder of what Daniel and Elena Bennett had sacrificed. On the 15th day of the trial, the prosecution played the recording from the first USB drive. Vincent Kane's voice filled the courtroom. "I want them dead. The Bennetts. Both of them. And make it look like an accident." The jury watched in silence. Some of them looked horrified. Others looked angry. But all of them looked convinced. The defense tried to argue that the recording was taken out of context, that Kane had been speaking hypothetically, that there was no proof he had actually carried out the order. But then the prosecution played the second recording, the one from the USB drive Warren had collected at the oak tree. "It is done. The Bennett house burned down last night. Both officers are dead." Kane's voice again, cold and satisfied. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Kane sat at the defense table, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. When the prosecution rested its case, The defense had nothing left to argue. Victoria Hayes, facing her own charges as an accomplice, had taken a plea deal and testified against Kane. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Vincent Kane had ordered the murder of Daniel and Elena Bennett. He had tried to kill their daughter, and he had run a criminal empire that had destroyed countless lives. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Kane was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the marshals led him from the courtroom, he looked directly at Warren, and for a moment there was something almost like respect in his eyes. Daniel Bennett was a better man than I gave him credit for, Kane said quietly. And you finished what he could not. Warren said nothing. There was nothing to say. He just watched as Kane was led away and felt the weight of 2 years lift from his shoulders. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Emma stood at the center of them, answering questions, explaining how the evidence had been found, how Daniel Bennett had planned everything before his death. Her article had already been picked up by national news outlets. Book deals and movie offers were flooding in. But Emma only cared about one thing. She pushed through the crowd to where Warren stood with Sophie and Margaret and the 6 dogs. "We did it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We actually did it," Warren smiled. "No, Daniel did it. We just finished the job." Sophie looked up at Warren with those big, solemn eyes. "Is it over now? Are the bad people gone?" Warren knelt down and took her small hands in his. "Yes, Angel, it is over. You are safe now." Sophie threw her arms around his neck, and Warren held her close, feeling something break open in his chest. Something that had been frozen for so long, he had forgotten it was there. Love. Margaret put a hand on Warren's shoulder. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." Warren looked up at her, his vision blurred with tears. "I should have been there sooner. I should have helped Daniel when he asked." "You are here now. That is what matters." 3 months after the trial, Cedar Falls held a ceremony in town square to honor Daniel and Elena Bennett. A bronze statue was unveiled, showing 2 canine officers standing side by side, a German shepherd at their feet. The inscription read, "In memory of officers Daniel and Elena Bennett. They gave their lives to protect this town and everyone in it." The entire town turned out for the ceremony. Mayor Jenkins gave a speech about courage and sacrifice. Chief Morrison presented Margaret with medals of valor that had been awarded posthumously to Daniel and Elena. And Sophie, wearing a new pink dress instead of her usual coat, placed flowers at the base of the statue while the 6 dogs sat in formation around her. Warren stood at the back of the crowd watching. He had been offered a place on the stage, but he had declined. This was not his moment. This was Daniel's moment, Elena's moment, Sophie's moment. But then Sophie turned and looked directly at him, and she smiled. A real smile, the first one Warren had seen on her face since this all began. She ran to him, weaving through the crowd, and grabbed his hand. "Grandpa, you have to come see. They put Daddy's name on a bench." She dragged him forward, and the crowd parted to let them through. There, beside the statue, was a new bench with a plaque that read, "Daniel Bennett Memorial Bench, dedicated to the man who taught us that love is the greatest protection." Warren sat down on the bench, and Sophie climbed up beside him. The 6 dogs arranged themselves around them, and for a moment, everything was perfect. "Grandpa Warren," Sophie said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything, Angel." "Do you think Daddy and Mommy can see us?" Warren looked up at the sky, at the clouds drifting lazily overhead, and he thought about all the things he believed and all the things he hoped were true. "Yes," he said, "I think they can, and I think they are very proud of you." Sophie leaned against him. "I think they are proud of you too." Warren had to wipe his eyes. "Why do you say that?" "Because you kept your promise. You kept me safe." Warren put his arm around her and held her close. "I will always keep you safe, Sophie. Always." Well, that evening there was a gathering at Margaret's house. Friends, neighbors, police officers, everyone who had helped bring Kane to justice. Emma was there, her camera documenting everything for the book she was writing. Chief Morrison brought his family. Even some of Daniel's old colleagues from the K9 unit came, bringing their own dogs to meet the 6 guardians who had become famous across the country. Warren stood on the back porch watching the celebration inside when Margaret joined him. "You should be in there," she said. "You are part of this family now." "I am just an old man who got a second chance," Margaret smiled. "No, you are the man who saved my granddaughter's life. You are the man Daniel trusted with his most important mission. You are family, Thomas, whether you accept it or not." Warren felt his throat tighten. "I do not deserve this." "Maybe not, but you have it anyway." Margaret paused. You know, Daniel used to talk about you all the time. He said you were the best teacher he ever had, the best mentor. He wanted to be like you. He was better than me. Maybe, but he learned from you. And now you are teaching Sophie. The circle continues. Warren looked through the window at Sophie, who was sitting on the floor surrounded by dogs and children, laughing at something someone had said. She looked happy. She looked safe. She looked like a normal 5-year-old for the first time in 2 years. I am going to make sure she stays this way, Warren said quietly. Happy, safe, loved. I know you will. 6 months after the trial, Warren sold his house and moved into the house next door to Margaret and Sophie. He said it was just to be closer, to help out with the puns, to make sure Sophie was protected. But everyone knew the truth. He had found his family again. Sophie started kindergarten that fall. She made friends, joined the school choir, learned to ride a bike. The 6 dogs, now officially retired from any kind of duty, spent their days lounging in Margaret's backyard and their nights sleeping in a protective circle around Sophie's bed. Warren spent his days teaching Sophie everything Daniel had taught him: how to read a dog's body language, how to earn respect through kindness instead of fear, how to be strong and gentle at the same time. And every morning at 7:15, they walked together. Sophie, Warren, Margaret, and 6 dogs. The same route Sophie had walked alone for so long. But now it was different. Now it was just a walk. No hidden evidence, no threats, no fear. Just a family moving through their town together. Emma visited often. Her book, The Guardian Pack, had become a bestseller. Movie studios were fighting over the rights. But she always made time to visit Cedar Falls, to check on Sophie, to have coffee with Warren, and hear his stories about the old days. One afternoon, as they sat on the Bennett Memorial Bench in Town Square, Emma asked Warren a question. Do you ever regret it? Selling your company, retiring, all of it? Warren watched Sophie playing with the dogs nearby. No, I spent 40 years building a business, training thousands of dogs, making a name for myself. And in the end, none of it mattered as much as this. As what? As being here, as being the person someone needs when they need it most. Emma smiled. Daniel knew what he was doing when he left you that letter. Maybe, or maybe he was just desperate and I was the only option. You are selling yourself short, old man. Warren laughed. Probably. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Sophie. Then Warren spoke again, his voice softer. You know what the hardest part was? Not the danger, not the investigation, not even facing Cain in that factory. What was it? Forgiving myself for all the years I wasted. For my son Michael, who I pushed away. For Daniel, who I trained but could not save. For Sophie, who I watched from a distance instead of helping. You are helping now. I know, but I lost so much time. Emma put her hand on his arm. Thomas Warren, you listened to me. You did not lose time. You found it. You found the time that matters, the time you have with Sophie, the time you have to be the grandfather you always should have been. That is not lost time. That is found time. Warren looked at her, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was right. That evening, Sophie asked Warren to tell her a story before bed. He sat in the chair beside her bed, the 6 dogs arranged around the room like sentinels, and he told her about her father. He told her about the young man who walked into his training facility with stars in his eyes and determination in his heart. He told her about the countless hours Daniel spent learning, practicing, perfecting his craft. He told her about the day Daniel graduated, how proud Warren had been, how much promise he had seen in that young officer. Your daddy was special, Warren said, not because he was the strongest or the fastest, but because he cared. He cared about doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous. Like you, Sophie said sleepily. No, Angel, I learned that from him. Sophie's eyes were closing. Grandpa Warren? Yes? I am glad you came back. Warren leaned down and kissed her forehead. So am I, sweetheart. So am I. He turned off the light and started to leave, but Sophie called out one more time. Grandpa? Yes? I love you. Warren stood in the doorway, his hand on the light switch, and felt something break and heal inside him at the same time. I love you too, Sophie. More than you will ever know. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of Oregon autumn day that made everything feel possible. Warren stood in his backyard, now connected to Margaret's by a gate they had installed 2 years ago, and watched as Sophie practiced commands with Thor. She was 8 years old now, taller, stronger, more confident. but still the same sweet girl who had walked silently through Cedar Falls with 6 dogs as her only companions. "Thor, sit," Sophie commanded, and the big dog obeyed instantly. "Good," Warren said. "Now heel." Sophie walked forward, and Thor moved with her, matching her pace exactly. The other 5 dogs watched from their spots in the shade, content to let Thor have his training time. "She is getting good," Margaret said from the porch. She was holding a pitcher of lemonade, watching her granddaughter with pride. "She has the gift," Warren said, "just like her father." "Are you going to train her professionally?" Warren shook his head. "No, I am going to teach her what dogs can teach us about life, about loyalty, about love, about showing up when it matters." Margaret smiled. "You have changed, Thomas. I had good teachers." That afternoon, Warren received a phone call from a number he had not seen in 3 years. He almost did not answer it, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Dad?" Warren's heart stopped. "Michael?" "Yeah, it is me." His son's voice was tentative, uncertain. I I saw the news about what you did, about the little girl in the trial, and I wanted to call to say, it is okay, son. You do not have to say anything. Yes, I do. I was wrong about you, about everything. I thought you did not care about family because you cared about dogs more. But I saw what you did for that little girl, how you risked everything to save her. And I realized I was wrong." Warren sat down heavily, his hands shaking. "Michael, I am the one who was wrong. I should have been there for you. I should have shown you that you mattered more than any job, any business, any amount of success. I know that now, and I have a son, Dad, your grandson. He is 5, and I want him to know his grandfather. If that is okay." Warren could not speak. Tears were streaming down his face, and he could not find the words. "Dad, are you there?" "Yes," Warren managed. "Yes, I am here. And yes, Michael, I would love to meet my grandson." They talked for an hour. They made plans for Michael to visit, to bring his family, to spend Thanksgiving together. When Warren finally hung up, he sat in his chair for a long time, staring at the phone, unable to believe what had just happened. Margaret found him there, saw the tears on his face, and put her hand on his shoulder. "Good news?" she asked. "The best," Warren said. "My son called. He is coming to visit, with his family." Margaret squeezed his shoulder. "You see, Thomas, second chances are real." That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Warren, Margaret, Sophie, Emma, Chief Morrison, and his wife, even a few of Daniel's old colleagues. The house was full of laughter and conversation and the warmth of people who had been through darkness together and come out the other side. Sophie sat beside Warren at the table, and at one point she leaned over and whispered, "Grandpa, are you happy?" Warren looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved, the people who had become his family. He looked at the 6 dogs sleeping peacefully in the living room, their mission complete, their purpose fulfilled. He thought about his son, about the grandson he would soon meet, about all the lost time that was finally being found. "Yes, Angel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am very happy." After dinner, they all walked to Town Square to watch the sunset. It had become a tradition, this gathering at the Bennett Memorial. Sophie placed fresh flowers at the base of the statue like she did every week, and the 6 dogs sat in their formation, silent guardians, even in peace. Warren stood with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the bronze faces of Daniel and Elena Bennett, and he spoke to them silently. "I kept my promise. Your daughter is safe. She is happy. She is loved. And I will make sure she stays that way for as long as I live." The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Sophie came to stand beside Warren, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "Do you think they would be proud of me?" Sophie asked quietly. "They are proud of you," Warren said, "every single day." "How do you know?" Warren pointed to the 6 dogs, to Thor and Luna and Ace and Storm and Shadow and Titan. "Because those 6 never stopped fighting for you, O. Just like your parents never stopped loving you. That kind of love does not die. It just changes form." Sophie thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "I think you are right, Grandpa." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky, surrounded by family, protected by love. And Warren felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Peace. The dogs had completed their mission. Cain was in prison. The truth had been told. Justice had been served. But more than that, a little girl who had walked in fear for 2 years now walked in joy. A man who had lost his way had found his purpose. And a family that had been broken was whole again. As they walked home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Sophie reached up and took Warren's hand. The 6 dogs walked beside them, not in tactical formation anymore, but simply as companions, as friends. "Grandpa," Sophie said. "Yes, Angel? Thank you for keeping me safe." Warren squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for teaching me what is worth protecting." And in the darkness above them, 2 stars shone brighter than all the others, watching over their daughter as she walked home with the man who had finished what they started. Daniel and Elena Bennett would never be forgotten. Their sacrifice would live on in every step their daughter took, in every story that was told, in every life that was saved because of the evidence they died collecting. They had been heroes in life, and they remained heroes in death. But their greatest legacy was not the criminals they caught or the cases they solved. Their greatest legacy was the little girl who walked through Cedar Falls every morning, surrounded by love, protected by loyalty, and guided by the promise that family never truly leaves. Even when they are gone, they remain. In the dogs we train, in the people we trust, in the love we leave behind. And that love, Warren thought as he looked down at Sophie's smiling face, that love is the greatest protection of all. The end.